"Ma'am, keep your hands where I can see them," the officer said, his voice echoing through the narrow apartment hallway. But what happened over the next 60 seconds would leave an entire police department questioning everything it thought it knew about judgment. The hallway smelled faintly of fresh paint and old pine cleaner, the kind of ordinary scent that belonged to quiet evenings and neighbors who nodded politely without ever learning each other's names. Apartment 4B sat at the end of the corridor, its brass numbers catching the soft amber glow from an overhead light that buzzed every few seconds. Naomi Brooks reached into her canvas tote, searching calmly for the ring of keys she had carried for years, unaware that 2 flights below, officers had just received a radio update about a burglary suspect reportedly entering the building. By the time she slid her key toward the lock, heavy footsteps thundered across the stairwell. Officer Ryan Mercer rounded the corner first, breathing hard after climbing 4 flights in a bulletproof vest that suddenly felt twice as heavy. His eyes swept the hallway in rapid bursts, searching for movement, for danger, for the person dispatch believed had disappeared somewhere inside the aging brick complex. Then he saw Naomi standing outside her apartment. She wore a navy raincoat over a simple cream sweater, comfortable slacks, and low-heeled shoes that showed the wear of someone who spent long days on her feet rather than behind a luxurious desk. Silver strands framed her neatly tied hair, and a leather briefcase rested against the wall beside her. Nothing about her appearance suggested urgency. Nothing about her expression suggested fear. Yet Ryan noticed only one detail. She had paused with her hand inside her bag just as he arrived. "Step away from the door," he called firmly. Naomi turned at the sound of his voice, surprised but composed. "Officer, I'm just getting my keys." Ryan closed the distance quickly, raising one hand in a clear signal for her to stop moving. His pulse pounded louder than the hallway light overhead. Dispatch had warned the suspect might be carrying stolen property, and every second felt like one more chance for a mistake. "Please remove your hand slowly," he instructed. Naomi met his eyes without hostility. Of course, her movements remained measured, careful, almost unusually patient. Instead of arguing or demanding explanations, she simply nodded once. The silence unsettled Ryan more than protest would have. Behind half-open apartment doors, curious neighbors peeked through narrow openings. A teenager paused halfway up the stairs carrying a grocery bag. An elderly man lowered the volume on a baseball game drifting from inside his apartment. The building itself seemed to hold its breath. Ryan's training urged him to control the situation before uncertainty became risk. Naomi's calmness urged something else entirely, though he could not yet identify it. "Before we go any further," she said evenly, "I would appreciate it if we followed proper procedure." The sentence landed with unexpected weight, spoken not with arrogance or defiance, but with quiet confidence. Ryan frowned. Most people raised their voices. Most people explained too much. This woman simply stood straight beneath the warm hallway light, as though patience itself were stronger than panic. Somewhere outside, distant thunder rolled across the evening sky, and rain tapped softly against the building's windows. Ryan glanced briefly toward the stairwell as another officer called that no suspect had been located upstairs. When he looked back, Naomi had not moved an inch. She waited beside her own front door with remarkable composure, her fingers now visible, her expression unreadable, while the leather briefcase at her feet remained closed, unnoticed, and carrying a truth that neither Ryan nor anyone watching from those cracked apartment doors could have imagined. Naomi Brooks lowered her hand slowly until the ring of silver keys rested in the open palm of her hand, making certain every movement could be seen. She neither hurried nor hesitated. Years of discipline had taught her that composure often spoke louder than explanation. The hallway remained silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling light and the steady rhythm of rain tapping against the windows overlooking the parking lot. Officer Ryan Mercer watched every motion with unwavering attention, convinced that certainty was only one careful decision away. He had been wearing the badge for less than 5 years, but the pressure of proving himself had grown heavier with every shift. Earlier that afternoon, his supervisor had reminded the entire patrol unit that a string of neighborhood break-ins had shaken public confidence. The message had been simple: respond quickly, secure every scene, and never assume anything. Those words echoed inside Ryan's mind as loudly as the dispatcher who had reported that the suspected burglar was believed to have entered this very building only minutes before. Naomi, however, knew nothing about those radio transmissions. Her day had begun before sunrise with black coffee, handwritten notes, and nearly 2 hours reviewing legal briefs spread neatly across her dining table. She preferred paper over tablets, margins filled with careful observations written in blue ink. After a full day of hearings and conferences, she had stopped at a neighborhood grocery store for fresh fruit, soup, and a loaf of wheat bread before driving home through slow evening traffic. To anyone watching, she looked like another hard-working resident ending another ordinary Wednesday. She had intentionally chosen a life that blended quietly into the community. Expensive cars never interested her. Neither did designer handbags nor public attention. The greatest compliment, in her mind, was being treated like everyone else. She believed respect should never depend upon occupation, wealth, or recognition. That belief had guided every important decision she had ever made. Ryan noticed the canvas grocery bag sitting beside the leather briefcase. Apples peeked over the top beside a carton of milk and a bouquet of yellow flowers wrapped in brown paper. Nothing seemed unusual, yet something inside him refused to relax. Another officer reached the hallway and quietly informed him that the search teams had not located anyone on the 5th floor. Ryan acknowledged the update with a short nod without taking his eyes off Naomi. The teenager standing on the staircase shifted his weight and discreetly lifted his phone, uncertain whether he was witnessing an ordinary police investigation or something that deserved to be remembered. An older woman cracked her apartment door another inch, concern softening her face as she studied the growing tension. Naomi noticed the worried expressions surrounding her more than she noticed the officer himself. She offered the elderly neighbor a reassuring smile before returning her attention to Ryan. "Officer," she said gently, "I understand you have responsibilities. I only ask that we take one careful step at a time." Her voice remained calm, carrying neither fear nor irritation. Ryan found the words unexpectedly disarming. They sounded less like a request and more like advice from someone accustomed to difficult conversations. He could not explain why, but for a brief moment he felt as though he were the one being carefully observed. Then another urgent radio transmission crackled through his shoulder microphone, reporting that new information suggested the suspect might still be somewhere inside the building. The hallway seemed to tighten around everyone present. Rain continued falling outside, soft and steady, while the unopened leather briefcase rested quietly against apartment 4B, holding documents that would soon transform an ordinary misunderstanding into a moment no one in that corridor would ever forget. Ryan Mercer pressed 2 fingers against the microphone clipped to his shoulder, listening carefully as dispatch repeated the latest update. The suspect was described only as wearing a dark hooded sweatshirt and carrying a backpack. No confirmed apartment number. No confirmed floor. Only fragments collected from frightened witnesses who had seen someone disappear inside the building moments earlier. The uncertainty settled over the hallway like the rain clouds gathering outside. Ryan looked back toward Naomi Brooks. Her grocery bag still rested neatly beside the briefcase. Her keys remained visible in her open hand. Every detail suggested an ordinary resident returning home after work, yet his training warned him that appearances alone could never close an investigation. The second officer, Daniel Ortiz, stepped quietly beside him and scanned the hallway. Unlike Ryan, Daniel had spent nearly 2 decades answering calls across the city. Experience had taught him that the loudest moments often required the calmest decisions. He studied Naomi's posture, the untouched grocery bag, the patient expression that had not changed since they arrived. Something about the scene felt incomplete. "Ma'am," Daniel asked politely, "have you seen anyone else come through this hallway during the last few minutes?" Naomi thought for only a moment before answering. "No, officer. I came upstairs from the parking garage, greeted Mrs. Holloway on the 3rd floor, and came directly here." Her answer arrived naturally, without hesitation or unnecessary detail. Ryan listened carefully but remained focused on the unanswered questions. Why had she paused with her hand inside her bag? Why did she seem so remarkably composed under pressure? He had encountered frightened residents, angry residents, and impatient residents. Calm like this was unusual. "Please step away from the apartment door for now," Ryan said. Naomi quietly complied, taking 2 measured steps backward. She folded her hands in front of her and waited without complaint. The teenager on the staircase lowered his phone for a moment, surprised that the woman had not argued once. Even Mrs. Holloway, watching from her partially open doorway, seemed puzzled by the unusual stillness filling the corridor. Outside, a flash of lightning illuminated the rain-covered windows before fading into another low rumble of thunder. Daniel glanced toward the leather briefcase resting against the wall. "May I ask if that belongs to you?" he said. Naomi nodded. "Yes, it contains work documents that I brought home this evening." Ryan's attention sharpened immediately. "What kind of work?" Naomi offered a courteous smile that revealed nothing more than quiet confidence. "Professional documents." The answer was truthful, yet incomplete. Ryan interpreted the careful wording as reluctance. Daniel interpreted it differently. He recognized someone accustomed to protecting confidential information. Neither officer realized how differently those interpretations would shape the next several minutes. Another radio call interrupted their thoughts. Officers searching nearby apartments had found no trace of the reported suspect. Dispatch now believed the original witness descriptions might have conflicted with one another. Ryan felt frustration building beneath the surface. A search without certainty placed everyone in an uncomfortable position. He wanted clear answers. Instead, every update seemed to raise another question. Naomi remained exactly where she stood, allowing silence to do what arguments never could. The warm hallway light reflected softly against the polished leather of her briefcase, while tiny drops of rain still shimmered across the shoulders of her navy coat. She looked less like someone hiding from authority and more like someone patiently waiting for authority to catch up with the facts. None of the neighbors knew her profession. None of the officers recognized her face. In that ordinary apartment hallway, she was simply another black woman returning home after a long day. And that quiet reality carried a lesson none of them had yet begun to understand. Officer Daniel Ortiz took one slow breath before speaking again. "Ma'am, thank you for cooperating. We still need to verify a few things before we can clear this hallway." Naomi Brooks inclined her head with the same quiet courtesy she had shown since the officers arrived. "I understand, officer." Her voice remained steady, almost gentle, carrying none of the frustration that several neighbors quietly expected to hear by now. Ryan Mercer watched every expression across her face, searching for the smallest inconsistency. Instead, he found only patience. That unsettled him more than resistance would have. The rain outside continued to fall in soft sheets across the parking lot, and headlights from passing cars briefly washed pale reflections across the hallway walls before disappearing again. Somewhere below, an elevator door opened and closed with a metallic chime, reminding everyone that ordinary life continued only a few floors away from the growing tension. Ryan looked once more toward the apartment door. "You said these are work documents," he said, nodding toward the leather briefcase. "Would you be willing to identify yourself so we can finish this more quickly?" Naomi paused for only a heartbeat. "I am happy to identify myself through the proper process. My identification is inside my briefcase." Ryan immediately focused on the case. "Then please open it slowly." Naomi did not move. Instead, she looked directly at him with calm eyes. "Officer, before I reach for anything, I would appreciate clear instructions so there is no misunderstanding." Daniel noticed the wording immediately. She was not refusing. She was asking for clarity. Years in uniform had taught him that clear communication often prevented unnecessary conflict. Ryan, however, heard hesitation where Daniel heard caution. The pressure of the unresolved call weighed heavily on his judgment. Another radio update crackled through his shoulder microphone. "Units be advised. Witness statements remain inconsistent. Continue verifying all contacts." The message provided no certainty, only more ambiguity. Ryan exhaled slowly. Every minute spent here felt like another opportunity for the real suspect to disappear. The teenager on the staircase quietly resumed recording with his phone, not out of excitement, but because something about the encounter felt unusually important. Mrs. Holloway stepped fully into the hallway, clutching her sweater tightly around her shoulders. "Officer," she said carefully, "she has lived here for years. She has always been kind to everyone in this building." Ryan acknowledged the comment with a brief glance, but remained focused on procedure. "Thank you, ma'am. We still have to complete our investigation." Naomi offered her neighbor a reassuring smile before speaking again. Mrs. Holloway, everything is all right. Those simple words carried remarkable calm, easing the older woman's concern more effectively than any official reassurance could have. Daniel found himself studying Naomi more closely. Her posture remained upright despite the uncomfortable circumstances. Her breathing never changed. Even her hands stayed relaxed at her sides. She reminded him of experienced professionals who had spent years making difficult decisions under public scrutiny. There was confidence in her silence, but no arrogance. Ryan finally nodded toward the briefcase. Please tell us exactly what you need to do before opening it. Naomi answered immediately. I will bend down, pick it up with my left hand, place it on the floor in front of me, unlock the combination, and remove my identification when you instruct me to do so. Daniel appreciated the precision. Ryan did as well, although he did not realize it. For the first time since entering the hallway, he lowered his voice. All right, one step at a time. Naomi gave a single respectful nod and slowly leaned toward the briefcase, unaware that the documents resting inside would soon reveal far more than her identity and quietly change the direction of every conversation that followed. Naomi Brooks lowered the briefcase exactly as she had described, placing it carefully on the polished hallway floor before resting both hands where the officers could plainly see them. Every movement was deliberate, unhurried, almost practiced. Officer Daniel Ortiz gave a small approving nod, recognizing that her calm cooperation had prevented confusion from becoming something larger. Ryan Mercer remained focused, watching each motion through the lens of caution that had defined his entire evening. The hallway seemed unusually still. Even the teenager holding a phone near the staircase had stopped shifting his weight. The only sounds were the rain tapping softly against distant windows and the quiet buzz of the overhead light. Go ahead and unlock it, Ryan instructed. Naomi entered the combination one number at a time without looking up. The brass latches released with a soft click that echoed through the narrow corridor. She slowly lifted the lid only a few inches and paused. May I continue? She asked. Yes, Ryan answered. Inside the briefcase sat neatly organized folders, a legal notebook filled with handwritten notes, several bound documents, and a leather portfolio. Nothing resembled stolen property. Nothing suggested criminal activity. Naomi reached toward the portfolio exactly as she had explained she would. Before her fingers touched it, another urgent transmission burst through Ryan's shoulder radio. All units. Witness now reports suspect may have switched outer clothing. Continue identifying individuals matching general description. Ryan's attention snapped back to uncertainty. The changing details frustrated him. Every new update seemed to erase the certainty of the one before it. Naomi immediately stopped moving, withdrawing her hand and waiting silently for further instructions. Daniel appreciated the restraint. Thank you, he said. Please remain still while we receive the update. Ryan stepped a few feet away to hear dispatch more clearly. As he turned, the corner of Naomi's legal notebook shifted slightly inside the open briefcase. A stack of papers slid forward just enough for one folder to slip onto the floor. It landed softly beside her shoe. Daniel instinctively bent to retrieve it. His eyes caught only a brief glimpse before he respectfully looked away. Across the top appeared the familiar formatting used by the federal court system, followed by a judicial seal partially visible beneath the edge of another document. He did not read further. Instead, he placed the folder carefully back into the briefcase exactly as he had found it. Something about the paperwork immediately changed the questions forming in his mind. Naomi quietly noticed his expression but said nothing. She simply closed the portfolio again and rested her hands beside the open case. Daniel walked toward Ryan, lowering his voice so the neighbors could not hear. I think we should slow this down, he said calmly. Ryan frowned. Why? Daniel glanced discreetly toward the briefcase. I may be mistaken, but I believe her work involves the federal court system. Ryan looked back toward Naomi, then toward the open case. Fatigue, pressure, and incomplete information wrestled inside his thoughts. Before he could respond, Mrs. Holloway quietly stepped forward with an umbrella she had forgotten she was holding. Officer, she said softly, that lady has helped people in this building for years. She checks on the seniors every winter. She brings groceries when someone is sick. I do not know what is happening tonight, but I know she has always treated everyone with kindness. Naomi lowered her eyes for a brief moment, clearly uncomfortable hearing praise directed toward her. "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway," she said gently. "Please do not worry." Her calm voice settled over the hallway once again. Ryan stared at the open briefcase from several feet away, realizing that the evening had become far more complicated than a simple investigation. The answers he had been searching for were sitting quietly inside that leather case, waiting for someone to ask the right question instead of making the fastest assumption. Ryan Mercer stood silently for several long seconds, his eyes fixed on the leather briefcase as though it had suddenly become the center of the entire hallway. The steady confidence that had carried him up 4 flights of stairs now felt strangely distant. Officer Daniel Ortiz did not interrupt the silence. He had learned years ago that some moments demanded fewer words, not more. Outside, the rain softened into a gentle drizzle that traced silver lines across the apartment windows. The hallway light flickered once before settling into a warm glow that reflected softly against the polished floor. Naomi Brooks remained exactly where she was, her hands resting calmly at her sides, waiting for instructions that had not yet come. She did not attempt to explain herself. She did not ask whether she was free to enter her home. She simply allowed the quiet to settle over everyone present. Mrs. Holloway slowly lowered the umbrella she had been holding, her worried expression easing only slightly. The teenager on the staircase finally slipped his phone into his pocket. For the first time since the officers had arrived, no one seemed interested in recording anything. Instead, they were simply watching. Ryan glanced toward Daniel. "What did you see?" he asked quietly. Daniel answered with equal restraint. "Enough to believe we should verify before making any more assumptions." Ryan nodded almost imperceptibly. Pride urged him to press forward. Experience, borrowed from the veteran standing beside him, suggested something different. Naomi noticed the exchange, but remained respectfully silent. She understood that difficult decisions often required space. Throughout her career, she had watched attorneys, juries, and public officials struggle with incomplete information. The strongest decisions rarely came from the fastest conclusions. They came from patience. A cool draft drifted through the hallway as someone opened the front entrance downstairs. The faint scent of wet pavement mixed with fresh coffee from an apartment where dinner preparations had quietly resumed. Ordinary life was returning around them, but the small group outside apartment 4B remained suspended in an unusual stillness. Ryan finally looked directly at Naomi. "Thank you for remaining cooperative," he said, his tone noticeably calmer than before. Naomi offered a gentle nod. "Thank you for taking the time to reassess the situation, officer." There was no sarcasm in her voice, no hidden accusation, only simple acknowledgement. That unexpected kindness unsettled Ryan more deeply than criticism ever could have. He had prepared himself for confrontation. Instead, he found grace. Daniel crouched beside the briefcase once more. "Ma'am, with your permission, I would like you to remove your identification exactly as you described earlier." "Of course," Naomi replied. She knelt slowly, reached into the leather portfolio, and carefully withdrew a slim identification holder. She held it without opening it until Daniel nodded. Then she unfolded it with measured precision and handed it toward him. Daniel accepted it respectfully. His eyes moved across the identification card for only a moment before his expression changed almost imperceptibly. His shoulders straightened. His breathing slowed. Without speaking, he looked toward Ryan and extended the identification into his hand. Ryan accepted it almost automatically. The hallway grew so quiet that the distant ticking of an apartment wall clock seemed unusually loud. His eyes settled on the official seal, then the name beneath it. Naomi Brooks, United States District Judge. Ryan read the words twice, then a third time, as though each reading challenged what he believed he had understood only minutes earlier. He slowly lifted his eyes toward the woman standing before her own apartment door. She looked exactly the same as she had when he first arrived. The difference was not in her appearance. The difference was in what he had failed to see. And in that silent hallway, beneath the warm light and the fading sound of rain, the weight of that realization settled more heavily than the badge resting on his own chest. Ryan Mercer felt the identification card grow unexpectedly heavy in his hand. The gold seal reflected the hallway light with quiet authority, but it was not the title that unsettled him most. It was the realization that nothing about Naomi Brooks had changed since the moment he first saw her standing outside apartment 4B. She had been patient then. She was patient now. The only thing that had changed was his understanding. Daniel Ortiz slowly exhaled before speaking. "Your Honor," he said respectfully, returning the identification with both hands. "Thank you for your patience this evening." Naomi accepted the card with a gentle nod and placed it back inside the leather holder. "Officer Ortiz," she replied. "Thank you for verifying before reaching conclusions." Her words carried neither triumph nor resentment. They simply acknowledged the importance of careful judgment. Ryan lowered his eyes for a brief moment. Around them, the hallway remained completely silent. Mrs. Holloway pressed one hand against her chest, as though she had finally understood why Naomi always spoke with such calm confidence during neighborhood meetings. The teenager standing on the stairs looked from the officers to Naomi, and then quietly slipped his phone completely out of sight. Somehow, recording the moment no longer felt appropriate. Ryan cleared his throat, searching for words that refused to come easily. "Your Honor," he finally said, "I owe you an apology." Naomi met his gaze without hesitation. "For what, officer?" The question surprised him. He expected anger. Instead, she invited reflection. Ryan answered honestly, "For allowing urgency to become certainty before I had enough information." Naomi considered his response for several seconds. "Urgency is part of your profession," she said softly. "So is restraint. The difficult part is remembering that both belong together." Daniel remained quietly beside them, recognizing that the conversation had become more important than the investigation that had brought them there. At that exact moment, another message came across the radio. Dispatch reported that officers several blocks away had located the burglary suspect after a witness identified the correct vehicle leaving the neighborhood earlier than originally believed. The building had never contained the suspect at all. Ryan closed his eyes for the briefest instant before acknowledging the transmission. "Copy," he answered quietly. The words seemed almost to disappear into the hallway. Mrs. Holloway looked toward Naomi with visible relief. "I knew something did not feel right," she whispered. Naomi smiled warmly. "Sometimes our first impression is kindness. Sometimes it is fear. Both deserve to be examined carefully." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. He had served in uniform long enough to understand the truth behind those words. Ryan slowly handed the identification back one final time. "Thank you for your grace," he said. Naomi carefully placed it inside her briefcase before closing the leather flap. "Grace is valuable," she replied. "But accountability is valuable too. They do not compete with one another." Ryan absorbed every word. Throughout his career, he had believed experience would teach him how to recognize danger more quickly. Standing in that quiet apartment hallway, he realized experience was also supposed to teach humility. Rain had nearly stopped outside, leaving only scattered drops falling from the roof onto the pavement below. The warm light overhead no longer seemed harsh. It simply illuminated three people standing together after a misunderstanding that could have ended as another forgotten incident, but had instead become something far more meaningful. Naomi lifted her grocery bag with one hand and her briefcase with the other. Before unlocking her apartment door, she looked once more at Ryan. "Officer," she said gently, "every person you meet has a story you cannot see. The badge does not ask you to know every story. It asks you to remember that one exists." Ryan stood silently as those words settled into the stillness around him, understanding that the lesson he would carry home that night had nothing to do with titles and everything to do with seeing the person before making the judgment. Naomi Brooks quietly unlocked the apartment door, then paused before stepping inside. The warm light from her living room spilled gently into the hallway, revealing shelves lined with well-worn books, framed family photographs, and a small wooden table holding a single vase of fresh white lilies. It was not the home of someone interested in displaying status. It was the home of someone who valued peace. She turned back toward the two officers, who still stood silently outside her doorway. Ryan Mercer looked as though he wanted to speak, but had not yet found the right words. Daniel Ortiz remained respectfully beside him, allowing the younger officer the space to finish a lesson that no training manual could have fully prepared him for. Naomi rested her briefcase beside the doorway before breaking the silence. "Would either of you care for a cup of coffee?" The invitation caught Ryan completely off guard. After everything that had happened, kindness was the last response he expected. "Your Honor," he answered carefully, I do not think I deserve your hospitality. Naomi smiled softly. Hospitality is not something people earn. It is something we choose to offer. Mrs. Holloway quietly smiled from across the hallway before slipping back inside her apartment, closing the door with gentle relief. The teenager on the staircase also turned and disappeared downstairs, sensing that the evening no longer belonged to spectators. Within moments, the hallway was almost empty again. Ryan slowly removed his cap, holding it respectfully in both hands. I have been thinking about what you said, he admitted. About seeing the person before making the judgment. Naomi nodded. Every profession carries authority, officer. Judges have it. Police officers have it. Teachers have it. Doctors have it. The real test is never whether we possess authority. It is whether we remember the humanity of the person standing in front of us while we exercise it. Ryan listened without interrupting. Those words reached deeper than any formal reprimand could have. Daniel finally spoke. Your Honor, I expect there will be an internal review simply because of how tonight unfolded. Naomi looked toward him calmly. That is appropriate. Ryan immediately looked up. You intend to file a complaint? Naomi answered with the same measured tone she had carried throughout the evening. I intend to tell the truth. Nothing more. Nothing less. Ryan accepted the answer with a quiet nod. Somehow it felt fair. More than fair. It felt exactly consistent with everything he had witnessed since arriving at the building. Naomi continued, truth is not punishment. Truth is simply the beginning of improvement. The words lingered in the hallway long after she finished speaking. Daniel understood immediately. Accountability was never meant to humiliate. It existed to strengthen public trust. Ryan slowly exhaled, feeling the weight of the evening settle into something different. Not fear. Responsibility. I hope one day, he said quietly, that if we ever meet again, it will be under better circumstances. Naomi smiled warmly. I hope so as well, officer. I would much rather be remembered as your neighbor than as the person standing at the center of a difficult evening. Ryan found himself smiling for the first time that night. It was small, uncertain, but genuine. The rain had stopped completely now. Through the hallway window, the wet pavement reflected the golden streetlights like ribbons of quiet light stretching into the darkness. Daniel extended his hand. Naomi shook it firmly. Ryan hesitated only for a moment before doing the same. There was no ceremony, no applause, no dramatic declaration. Only three people acknowledging that respect had finally replaced assumption. As Naomi gathered her grocery bag once more, Ryan realized the greatest lesson of the night had never been that she was a federal judge. The greatest lesson was that every person deserved the same dignity before anyone knew their title, their profession, or the story they carried behind an ordinary front door. 3 months later, the first rays of autumn. Sunlight stretched across the broad stone steps of the federal courthouse, turning the marble a soft shade of gold as people quietly made their way toward another ordinary workday. Naomi Brooks climbed the familiar staircase with the same canvas tote she had carried for years, greeting the security officers, courthouse staff, and custodians by name before disappearing behind the heavy bronze doors. Nothing about her routine had changed. She still arrived early. She still carried handwritten notes instead of relying entirely on digital files. She still paused each morning to thank the maintenance crew for preparing the building before the first hearing began. Inside courtroom 7, attorneys organized their files while spectators filled the wooden benches. Above them, the words engraved behind the bench reminded everyone that justice demanded both fairness and humility. Across town, Officer Ryan Mercer sat quietly inside a training room with 24 other officers attending an advanced course on constitutional policing, procedural fairness, and communication during uncertain encounters. The instructor never mentioned Naomi by name, yet Ryan recognized the lesson immediately. Every scenario emphasized the same principle that had echoed in his thoughts since that rainy evening. Slow down. Verify. Listen. Respect the person before reaching the conclusion. When the instructor asked the room what separated authority from leadership, Ryan found himself answering without looking at his notes. Authority gives you responsibility, he said. Respect determines how you carry it. The room fell silent for a moment before the instructor nodded thoughtfully. Weeks later, a community meeting brought neighborhood residents, police officers, teachers, business owners, and local leaders together inside a public library auditorium. The purpose was simple: build trust before another misunderstanding ever had the chance to grow. Ryan volunteered to attend. Daniel Ortiz sat a few rows behind him, quietly pleased that the younger officer had chosen to participate without being asked. Near the front of the room, Naomi spoke briefly about the importance of public confidence in every institution that served the community. She did not describe what had happened outside apartment 4B. She did not embarrass anyone. Instead, she spoke about listening, patience, and the courage to admit when more information was needed before making decisions. After the meeting ended, people gathered in small conversations beneath warm lights that reflected across polished library floors. Ryan waited until the crowd had begun to thin before approaching Naomi. "Good evening, Your Honor," he said respectfully. Naomi smiled. "Good evening, Officer Mercer." There was no awkwardness between them now, only quiet understanding. Ryan handed her a small envelope. "I wanted you to have this." Inside was a handwritten note. It contained only one sentence. "Thank you for teaching me a lesson that no classroom ever could." Naomi folded the note carefully and placed it inside her tote. "Keep learning," she replied. "That is the best way to honor any lesson." Ryan nodded with genuine gratitude. As they stepped outside, a gentle breeze carried golden leaves across the courthouse plaza while families walked home beneath the fading evening sky. There were no cameras waiting, no headlines, no applause. Only ordinary people crossing paths in a city that had quietly become a little stronger because understanding had replaced assumption. Ryan watched as Naomi walked toward the crosswalk, stopping to help an elderly neighbor carry 2 heavy grocery bags across the street before continuing on her way without expecting recognition from anyone. He smiled to himself, placed his cap back on his head, and turned toward his patrol car. The sunlight faded behind the courthouse columns, but one truth remained clear long after the shadows reached the sidewalk. A title may earn respect, but character earns trust, and true justice begins long before anyone learns the name printed on an identification card.